WoW really wants you to know that they've changed. Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and I've done the Kirin Tor quest in the War Within relatively recently. And there's been this theme, I don't want to call it subtle because it kind of feels anything but, throughout a lot of the War Within. I quite like the story, and I quite like the direction they're taking the world and the story with the War Within. But a lot of what they talk about, a lot of the themes, a lot of the messaging, and sometimes even the mechanics of the story that they're telling feels like a concerted, focused effort to tell you, the player, that World of Warcraft is changing from what it has been ever since that post-Legion era. Battle for Azeroth, Shadowlands, Dragonflight, like that entire era, the War Within kind of feels, at least in terms of a story, that it's trying to tell you we're no longer that. And let's be frank here, there's a lot of people, myself included, that became disillusioned with the state of the world of Azeroth and WoW in terms of being capable of delivering a compelling story in that era of the game. It felt way too lighthearted and childish in terms of its overall execution, whereas a lot of the stuff they were focusing in on so entirely felt antithetical to the aesthetics of what made Warcraft so compelling and engrossing for so long. But also the way they decided to resolve various plot lines just didn't feel particularly satisfying, or again, lining up with why a lot of people, myself included, got into and became so invested with Warcraft overall. Like that period of time in Warcraft's story where like every disagreement or every big political problem that happened within the game just ended up with, let's form a council. And it's like, alright, I mean, I think it kind of works for the Forsaken, sure. Especially if you do those quests involving the Forsaken retaking the Undercity and Lordaeron. Yeah, the council kind of works there because the characters are kind of good. But like, everywhere else, and even then, just in terms of optics, it doesn't feel like Warcraft. This was especially true for things like, you know, the Horde, and now they have a War Council, and it's just like, say what you will, the idea of the War Chief was so intertwined with the very idea and essence of the Horde. And the idea that, oh, in this modern era, they're going to just have a council, and it doesn't feel as brutish or as cool or as Warcraft as having a singular War Chief. And if we talked about all the sins of the Warcraft story committed in this era of time, we would be here for a long time. Like, it would make Illidan's jail sentence seem paltry in comparison. And then as I played the War Within story when I first came back to this game back in November, and as I've continued to play it since, every time I look at the story and a lot of these plot threads and the ways they tell these stories, I'm just going, wow, they really want to drive home the idea we're no longer that anymore. And I don't think the War Within story is perfect or just an absolute return to form or anything like that. It has its issues, it has its faults. We're still looking for that rule of cool. Again, we're going in the right direction, but we're still needing to make progress in that regard. But there's a lot of things they do in the War Within, and I just kind of want to show a couple of these in the background of this video as I, talk about the War Within. I think a good place to just start is that Kirin Tor quest that came out not too long ago, about the beginning of the year, because, it was time-gated, because of course it was. But if you actually go and do that quest, yeah, it's nothing particularly special or anything like that, but one of the lines they had near the end of that quest chain really stuck with me, because it was the epitome of, like, a lot of the things that I didn't like, either consciously or subconsciously, about the Warcraft story for the longest time. I think it was Khadgar that said this, and I wrote this down in my notes on my phone, and I think this is word for word: no more councils, no more floating cities, no more meddling in world affairs. In regards to the Kirin Tor, and that's about the new direction they want to take the Kirin Tor, but it does feel, right, like the simple leap of faith in regards to them saying that is pretty much Blizzard directly saying that to the player. We're done with resolving every quest line or every plot point with a council. No more of these weird intermediaries like floating cities that have to meddle in all the world affairs. Let's let the world breathe and live by itself, because that's what makes Warcraft so interesting and compelling. And it wasn't in one of my comment sections. I think it was on a comment section under a Bellula video, because I've just been obsessed with his content lately. Someone stated, and I wish I could find the original comment, but someone talked about that the charm of the Warcraft races was that they all all had their own individual goals, and that they could all be like heroic in their own way, but they each had their own flaws. The Blood Elves, right, had undergone so much sacrifice, so much tragedy at the hands of characters like Kael'thas and Arthas and the like that, but they were also power hungry. The Orcs are these like noble savages, but sometimes they can give into their bloodlust or thirst for power a bit too much. Humanity in Warcraft talks about honor and valor all the time until the cows come home, but then you get characters like Garithos back in Warcraft 3, whose prejudices like ostracize, well, the Sin'dorei. Night Elves in essence are like at least supposed to be protectors of Azeroth and the Force and all that, like, you know, ever since Warcraft 3 they are intrinsic to the Warcraft experience, but because of all the things they've experienced and came to understand, they're very isolationist and can be extremely savage to protect what they want, or at least they were back in the days of Warcraft 3. And like, you can draw up these kinds of ideas for each of the races, or at least you could back in the day, and then the trend in Warcraft's story was to focus in on like trying to overcome those issues, which really sanitized, because of the way they told the story for the longest time, it really sanitized how everything felt. It was a big point of conversation back in the days of Dragonflight that the Night Elves no longer have the savagery, the teeth they used to have, and they just kind of felt like these weak characters. And I don't mean like physically weak, I mean like weak in terms of the story that they provided. It no longer had the grit, it no longer had the edge that made them compelling once upon a time, and while a lot of conversation back in the days of Dragonflight surrounded this perceived sanitation of the Night Elves, you can feel that kind of taking effect for a lot of the different races in Warcraft. Particularly with the Horde, it's one of the reasons I went from Horde to Alliance. I just no longer really found them cool. And I'm talking back in the days of Battle for Azeroth, and still kind of to this day. So when you get a quest line like the Kirin Tor quest, and you get lines of dialogue like, no more councils, no more floating cities, no more meddling in world affairs, sounds to me like we're moving on from that style of storytelling and resolution, and allowing the world to breathe and live, and be itself, and be as cool and interesting as it should be. And hopefully we'll start to see that more and more as the story continues, as we get to the part of the story in the World Soul Saga, where we start to feel Metzen's influence. I think Nightfall, 11.15 will probably be that time, because that seems like the big transition into Midnight and away from necessarily the War Within, if that makes sense. That's just speculation on my part, though. But like, this isn't a video just about one line of dialogue from the Kirin Tor quest that maybe 5 people did. There's so many other things in the War Within. Take the beginning of it, the destruction of Dalaran, something that has been so intrinsic with the Warcraft story in World of Warcraft for the longest time, and whether correctly or incorrectly so, what a lot of people associate with this modern era of Warcraft storytelling, the War Within begins with its destruction. The War Within also begins with a redesign for Alaria, just in terms of her visuals. But again, it's the small things that, when taken together, add more dots on a graph that show a line forming here. And correlation may not be causation, but there's something going on here in my opinion. Think about what it means to have Alaria be one of the main characters for the War Within. Like, whether intentionally or not, this is Blizzard taking a character from the days of Warcraft freaking 2 and putting us front and center on the stage for the War Within, the beginning of the World Soul Saga. And not only doing that, but giving her a redesign for this new era. This feels deliberate to me. Now think on the villain, Xal'atath. Where is she from? Well, she was the Shadow Priest dagger back in the days of Legion, a very beloved expansion that gets more nostalgia as the months go by now. You take a character that was well beloved and liked from those Halcyon days, and you make her the antagonist, you make her the villain. Sure, she didn't have the most development back in the days of Dragonflight before, like the Darkheart part, or Shadowlands and stuff like that, but it's the idea of going back to Legion and taking a character from there, and then you put her as the antagonist here. Then think about what happens in the Ringing Deeps with Magni Bronzebeard, another character that so many people in the modern day associate with this lackluster storytelling and story and plot points that Warcraft had for the longest time. He was the face of Battle for Azeroth, the Wounds Champion, this dwarf made out of diamond that kept yapping about Azeroth and her blood and Azerite and all that crap. The guy you associate and heard so many times yap at you during World Quest. What do they do with him in the War Within. One, give him a personality and an actual story and character, but also they take away the visual. He was willing to sacrifice his life to free these Earthen, but what actually happened was he managed to live, but he reverted back to his regular dwarven form that people associate back again in the glory days of Warcraft. It was a good story by itself in the Ringing Deeps, do not get me wrong, I'm a big fan of it. It was one of my favorite moments in the War Within. But again, you have to think of the symbolism going on here. This is pretty much Blizzard telling you, hey, you know this icon for what many perceive to be a bad era for Warcraft? We're taking it off the board. We're going back to basics, back to the glory days of Warcraft. And I can already see what some of the comments will be. It's all well and good to talk about going back there. It's all well and good to be saying you're moving on and you're trying to be better, but we've been down this road before. We have to see it to believe it. And I agree, wholeheartedly and full stop. We have to see it to believe it. Midnight will be a massive test in this regard. But I think with the War Within, sure, it's not perfect, and we still need to get that rule of cool style of storytelling back in the game, but I think this is the best emotional kind of storytelling and story we've ever had in World of Warcraft, consistently, mind you, because there's been bright points before, like Suramar in Legion, but from like pole to pole, from beginning, middle to end, the War Within is like the most well-constructed story I've seen Blizzard put out in World of Warcraft, like in the game, not in an expanded piece of media, like a book, or an audio story or anything like that. I mean, in the game, for an expansion level story, this is like the #1 for me. It's like right alongside the leveling of Warlords of Draenor. Maybe that's a hard take and I get it. I'm not saying they haven't had good ones before. Legion was particularly good for the most part. But like this felt like the best use of emotion I've seen Blizzard really use in Warcraft's story in World of Warcraft for the longest time. And I've talked about this before. I think the World of Warcraft story from here on out is going to live or die on the back of Anduin Wrynn. They need to get this character right. They're putting all their marbles, or if not all of them, the vast majority of them, in his basket. He's clearly the face of this franchise going forward. It's like him and Illyria right now. So much of the story over the last few expansions have centered around building that character and developing that character, and we need the payoff. And we got a little bit of it in the War Within. But again, let's talk about this deeper symbolism, and by deep I mean like skin deep here, that I've been talking about throughout a lot of this video. The War Within essentially being this opportunity by Blizzard to tell us, the player, that we're moving on from this perceived bad era, and not even perceived, it's just this flat out bad era for World of Warcraft. They want to move on from that, leave that into the past, and do something new and better that's more evocative of those halcyon days that we all associate with Warcraft as a whole. Just like, think about what Anduin's story in the War Within is really all about. It's him having trauma from Shadowlands. I mean, we can all relate to that. That expansion sucked. It's when I largely left the game, and he's not sure about himself. He's not sure that he can be better, if he can go back to what it was like before those days. Largely lines up with how a lot of people view about Warcraft right now, isn't it? A lot of people dropped out of the game during Shadowlands, and they not just became negative towards the game, they became apathetic towards it. They lost hope, the belief that it could ever be good again. I did for a period of time. So while inside the story of the War Within, it's all about Anduin overcoming that trauma of being the jailer's pawn, not being able to manifest or utilize the light until eventually he is able to at the very end of the story. In a way, it's almost the story of Blizzard trying to overcome the shadows of their past with Shadowlands. I don't think they've fully moved on from it yet, and I don't think they're even halfway there, but I think they've started down the correct path. Anduin was all about that hopeless feeling so many people had with the IP for the longest time since the days of Shadowlands, and that those feelings were boiling up before then as well, don't get me wrong, but it came to a head with Shadowlands. And then Illyria was about the anger that people felt as well, and learning to overcome that. There's so many individual moments and small plot threads, or even major plot threads in the War Within that feels as if it's Blizzard trying to directly communicate to the player, communicate to all of us, that they're at least trying to be better. And I've been playing a lot of WoW recently. I think they are getting a lot better. I know there's a lot of people still jaded and pessimistic or just apathetic about Warcraft, and I can understand it, right? Because I was for the longest time. But they hooked me back. I love the game again. I'm interested to find out what happens going forward into the future, because most of the things that happened in the War Within I quite enjoyed, from both a story and storytelling perspective. And most of the stuff that I perceived to be cringe was like relegated to stay a while and listens that I could have just left if I didn't care about it, but I wanted to absorb the story either way. And is it perfect? Not by any stretch of the imagination. It's not perfect. Probably won't ever be perfect. But storytelling in-game was never Blizzard's strong suit when it came to World of Warcraft. God, I remember that conversation even in the days of, like, Cataclysm. Storytelling was never necessarily their strong suit, but I think it's becoming a strong suit for the game. It's not like they found the exact formula when it comes to weaving together both rule of cool but also in-depth emotional storytelling that feels like it's above a third-grade reading comprehension level. They're not perfect in this regard yet, but again, it feels like they're getting a hell of a lot better, and they're not on the right track yet, but the hell of a lot closer than they used to be. And that won't be enough for a lot of people, and I get it, I truly do. But for me, as someone who thought the game was just going to be designed for a different audience and a different demographic than what appealed to me, I'm on board at least for now. I'm hooked. They still have to make a lot of landings, do not get me wrong. It's all well and good to identify that what you've been doing up to this point was a problem and was bad behavior. It's a hell of a different point to address it and move on from it. Much like the story of World of Warcraft, it's not just a matter of telling, you have to show it. Cutscenes have gotten a hell of a lot better in-game and way more frequent. Characterization is better, not perfect, but better, but there's still a lot you need to get right, and Anduin is like the best example of this. I think he's closer to being a great character than ever before. And honestly, for me, I probably only need just like one big moment where he's just cool for the sake of being cool. I want a scene of Anduin picking up Charlemagne, looking some jabroni dead in the eye, and going 1v1 and smacking him down. You may say that just sounds like cool for the sake of being cool, but that is the essence of Warcraft. Letting these characters be freaking cool. They don't have to be perfect in their motivations, but you have to let them be cool. As I've talked about before, and also in this video, the story for World of Warcraft from here on out rides and dies on the character of Anduin. They need to get him right. I think they can. But for the longest time, he was a perfect microcosm of all of the sins of Warcraft storytelling. Someone perceived to be a crybaby who was overly emotional for the role that he was in, despite the things he had gone through. Because the ratio of him coming to terms with those elements to his character compared to how many great, cool moments he had was way too lopsided. You need way more moments and scenes like the one in the Battle for Azeroth cinematic, adorned in that lion gear, which looks badass, by the way. We did not put enough respect on his drip back in the days of Battle for Azeroth. That set looked incredible. But like resurrecting the entire Alliance force with the lighter healing them or whatever, that was cool. We need more like that. You don't want to take away all the emotional elements of that character or the story going forward, but you need to blend it with the cool, the bombastic, the adrenaline pumping moments. Him being willing to sacrifice himself going into Ashkahet during the story, that's cool, sure, but we need a moment of him just defying the odds and being dang cool. Smacking somebody down, being someone that people who play Alliance can point to and say, that's my king right there. And he's not there yet. A long way to go, but you can make a lot of distance up quickly with a moment like that. A big climactic moment that just feels dang cool. Harkening back to the days of the hype that scenes like the Wrathgate. Or like, pick any cutscene from the Warlords of Draenor leveling. Or Illidan saying, I am my scars, and him coming back in the end of the Nighthold raid. Varian sacrificing himself on the Broken Shore. Anduin needs a memorable, badass, blood-pumping, adrenaline-filled scene like that. And we need to have more scenes like that going forward. Not only those scenes, you need to blend it with this modern storytelling approach in The War Within, because I think it's a genuine step in the right direction. But like I talked about before, it's all well and good that The War Within talks about all the failings of the past. It's all well and good that they're trying to harken back to the days of glory that Warcraft once had. The utilization of characters from those golden days. It's all well and good, and I do think the War Within was genuinely pretty dang good. I really enjoyed it, but you need to continue showing this, and you need to continue to get better. Those are just my 2 cents, though. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Leave a comment down below with what you would like to see from the storytelling direction for World of Warcraft going into the future. Is there a particular beat you want them to hit? Is there a particular aspect, or element of the story you want them to address or rectify? Or has there been something recently, like in Dragonflight or the War Within, that you really appreciated and liked? I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye, everybody, until we meet again.